August 1944. Normandy was a nightmare of mud, hedgerows, and endless casualties. Allied forces had been stuck here for 2 long months, pushing through a maze of dense farmland and fortified German positions. Progress was measured not in miles, but in yards. Every step forward came at a heavy cost: lives, morale, and precious momentum. Inside the supreme headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Force in Versailles, General Dwight D. Eisenhower stood over a massive map, flanked by his senior officers. British, American, and Canadian commanders crowded the room, all faces tense, all eyes fixed on the same question: how do we finally break out of Normandy? The situation was grim. For weeks, Allied forces had been grinding forward, their tanks bogged down, infantry pinned by artillery, and supply lines stretched thin. Casualties mounted every day, and the frustration was palpable. General Omar Bradley stepped forward and pointed to a section of the map. "Operation Cobra," he said. The plan was simple in theory: concentrate heavy bombing on the German defenses, break open a gap, and push armor through that hole. In reality, it was anything but simple. Normandy's terrain was unforgiving, and even if the lines were breached, the challenge of exploiting that breakthrough would be enormous. Eisenhower nodded, absorbing the information. The plan carried risk, but it was the only path forward. And yet, as the staff discussed timelines and logistics, a British liaison officer burst into the room, urgency in his step. "Sir, I have a message from Third Army." Eisenhower's attention sharpened. Third Army, the new army under General George Patton, was now activated, ready to strike. "What did Patton want?" Eisenhower asked quietly, already bracing for the answer. The officer handed him the message. Eisenhower read it once, then again. His face shifted from concentration to disbelief. It was audacious, unrealistic, impossible. Yet there it was, in black and white. Third Army planned to advance south toward Brittany, secure the peninsula within 4 days, and then pivot east toward Paris, continuing as far as fuel supplies would allow. Bradley's jaw dropped. 4 days? That was over 100 miles of contested territory. Eisenhower's quiet voice broke the silence. "Sir, that's impossible. No army can move that fast." And yet, Patton believed it was possible. Eisenhower picked up the phone, calling Third Army headquarters. Minutes later, Patton's voice crackled over the line. "This is Patton," he said. Eisenhower wasted no time. "George, you plan to advance 100 miles in 4 days, through enemy territory, with limited fuel?" Patton's reply was steady, almost casual. "Correct. The Germans are in chaos. If we move fast, we can be in Brittany before they even realize the breakthrough has occurred. But only if we move now. Delay, and the opportunity is lost. I'll handle the supply situation later." Bradley shook his head, skeptical. The risks were enormous. Supply lines could fail. German counterattacks could encircle his forces. Logistics dictated caution. Eisenhower considered the words carefully, aware that conventional doctrine would argue against such a move. Yet Patton's audacity was undeniable. Finally, Eisenhower said, "All right, George, you have permission to advance. But if you run out of fuel and get stuck, I won't be able to help." Patton's voice was confident, cutting through the tension. "Understood, sir. Third Army out." The line went dead. As Operation Cobra began on July 25th, the Allied bombing campaign flattened German positions. Smoke, fire, and dust engulfed the hedgerows. American armor surged into the breach, infantry following behind. Patton, however, did not pause to consolidate. He didn't wait for flanking units or supply lines. He attacked immediately, pushing forward with speed that stunned both allies and enemies. Within hours, the gap widened. Chaos spread through German lines, and the first signals of the impossible began to take shape. 3 days later, Eisenhower received another urgent message from Third Army. 4th Armored Division had captured Rennes. 6th Armored Division was approaching Brest. Eastern Brittany's major roads were under American control. Eisenhower traced the path on the map, disbelief written across his face. "Good God, he's already there," he whispered. Bradley looked on, silent, understanding the magnitude of what had just occurred. Where 2 weeks of cautious advancement had been expected, Patton had done it in just 4 days. Across the German command, confusion was widespread. General Paul Hauser of the 7th Army stared at reports, shaking his head. No army could have moved this fast, he insisted. Yet multiple intelligence sources confirmed the same positions. Patton was not only ahead of schedule, he had shattered the conventional understanding of how armies moved. By the time German units tried to respond, Patton was somewhere else entirely, forcing them to react instead of plan, defend instead of attack. Allied leaders would later note that speed itself had become Patton's most effective weapon. Where a slow army is vulnerable to counterattack, a fast army creates its own protection, moving unpredictably, striking before the enemy can anticipate. Patton's focus, however, was not on glory. Eisenhower had asked him to employ strategic deception, to let Montgomery receive public credit for operations while he carried out the real work. Patton bristled at first, arguing that he was not a subtle man. "I cannot win battles quietly," he told Eisenhower. "I cannot achieve victories without being noticed. That is not who I am." Yet Patton understood the bigger picture. If the Germans believed Montgomery's operations were the primary threat, they would divert forces there, leaving Patton free to maneuver. Slowly, he agreed to the plan, even if it went against his natural instincts. Victory, he realized, sometimes required hiding in plain sight, striking where least expected. As July ended, Third Army's advance accelerated. Patton improvised supply lines using captured German vehicles and fuel, abandoning non-essential assets to maintain momentum. Every decision was calculated risk. His officers worried about exhaustion and overextension, but Patton's energy and decisiveness inspired the troops to keep pushing. In a campaign where hesitation could mean disaster, Patton turned audacity into a strategic advantage. By the end of the first week of August, the Third Army had crossed into Brittany, securing ports and roadways far faster than any planner had imagined. The German 7th Army was in chaos, forced to retreat and reorganize, constantly reacting to Patton's unpredictable movements. The success of the breakout was not just about speed or tactics. It was about mindset. Patton refused to accept the word impossible. Where others hesitated, he acted. Where doctrine imposed limits, he innovated. His soldiers followed him not because the path was safe, but because the commander inspired confidence that speed, boldness, and adaptability could overcome even the most formidable obstacles. Allied planners took note, realizing that mobile warfare in the modern age demanded audacity as much as planning. Patton's leadership was teaching a lesson that textbooks could not convey. In certain moments of history, a single bold commander could redefine the possibilities of war. By early August, the shock waves of Patton's advance were being felt across the Allied command and the German defenses alike. Brittany, a region the Allies had assumed would take weeks to secure, had fallen under the Third Army's control in record time. Rennes and Brest, key ports vital for resupply, were already in American hands. Eisenhower, standing over his maps in Versailles, could scarcely believe the pace. Arrows representing Third Army's movement seemed to leap ahead of reality itself, moving faster than mapmakers could update. Bradley and other senior officers exchanged uneasy glances. "No army should be this far, this fast," Bradley muttered under his breath. Yet Patton's audacity had made it so. While the Allies were stunned by the speed, the Germans were thrown into a panic. General Paul Hauser and his staff could not comprehend the velocity of Third Army's movements. Reports confirmed what seemed impossible. Entire armored divisions had crossed Brittany in just 4 days. Infantry and mechanized units securing roads and towns as if the region had simply emptied itself of resistance. The intelligence officers insisted the reports must be wrong. Yet every source confirmed the positions. Patton was moving too fast for conventional logic, outpacing not only German expectations but also Allied plans. After securing Brittany, Patton made a decision that stunned even his most trusted officers. He pivoted the Third Army 90 degrees east toward Paris. His staff immediately raised concerns. "Sir, we haven't secured Brest or Lorient. Ports are crucial. We could risk overextension," one officer argued. Patton didn't flinch. "Ports don't matter if we can end the war faster. Paris is the objective. Germany is the target. We move east." This was not a reckless choice. Patton understood the strategic value of momentum. The Germans were in disarray, scrambling to respond to advances they could neither predict nor contain. Time, more than territory, was the weapon now. Executing the pivot required extraordinary coordination. Tanks, artillery, and infantry had to realign mid-march, roads clogged with supply vehicles and troops. Yet Patton's engineers and staff improvised solutions at every turn. Destroyed bridges were bypassed with temporary crossings. Captured German vehicles were pressed into service. Fuel was rationed to keep the main thrust moving while non-essential units were left behind temporarily. In essence, Patton's army was running on ingenuity as much as speed. Every decision was a calculated risk, every improvisation a gamble that could have ended in disaster. But that risk was precisely what made Patton dangerous and effective. Meanwhile, Eisenhower faced a command crisis. Patton's eastward surge meant that Third Army was racing ahead of the rest of the Allied forces. Montgomery, observing from London and Normandy, was outraged. His meticulous, methodical approach could not reconcile with Patton's audacity. "This is madness," Montgomery reportedly shouted over the secure line. Bradley, ever cautious, warned Eisenhower of the risks. Supply lines were stretched thin. Flanks were exposed. One misstep, one German counterattack, and Third Army could be isolated and destroyed. Eisenhower's strategic mind weighed the options. Order Patton to slow down, consolidate, and wait for support, or allow the momentum to continue, knowing that speed itself could deliver decisive advantage? Eisenhower finally chose the latter, carefully framing his instructions. "Advance as far as fuel allows," he told Patton over the phone, "but the moment your position becomes unsustainable, you halt." Patton acknowledged, understanding the balance between audacity and caution. For him, the orders were more a guideline than a constraint. The Third Army would continue to surge east, pushing German forces to their limits, exploiting chaos and opportunity wherever it appeared. Eisenhower could only watch in awe and concern as Patton's arrows raced across the map. As August progressed, Third Army's eastward advance became almost mythic. Towns fell before resistance could be organized, bridges and roads were captured intact, and the German command struggled to respond effectively. Patton's audacity had shifted the nature of the campaign. The Germans were no longer dictating the pace. They were reacting, scrambling to plug holes and defend against attacks that were unpredictable in timing and direction. Patton's army moved like a living organism, shifting, pivoting, and exploiting gaps in enemy lines with remarkable precision. The speed of Third Army also forced Eisenhower and his staff to reconsider conventional military doctrine. Logistics, normally the backbone of an army's advance, became flexible and improvisational. Captured German fuel, abandoned vehicles, and non-essential assets were repurposed to maintain momentum. Troops were ordered forward before supply lines caught up. Traditional wisdom said that an army could not move faster than its logistics, yet Patton's army proved the opposite. Speed could generate its own supply solutions, forcing enemy forces to react in chaos rather than attack in strength. During this period, the French countryside witnessed an extraordinary spectacle. Villages, towns, and major roads seemed to flip from German control to American within hours. Locals watched as columns of tanks, trucks, and infantry swept past, often leaving German units scrambling to retreat or surrender. Morale within the Third Army soared. Soldiers followed Patton not because the campaign was easy, it was exhausting and dangerous, but because they trusted their commander's vision and audacity. Momentum, energy, and initiative became contagious, and troops felt part of something historic, something unstoppable. By mid-August, the advance threatened to outrun not only supplies, but also the broader Allied strategy. Eisenhower had to balance risk and opportunity. Patton's pace was creating strategic advantages, yet he was dangerously ahead of other forces. Bradley cautioned repeatedly, highlighting potential gaps that could be exploited by a German counterattack. But Patton's philosophy was simple. A disorganized enemy is a defeated enemy. Any pause could allow the Germans to regroup and rebuild defenses. The window of opportunity had to be seized, and Patton's relentless push was designed to do exactly that. Every day, German forces were forced to pull back further, abandoning positions, reorganizing, and trying to predict Third Army's next move. Patton's unpredictability was a weapon in itself. By the time the Germans realized where the main strike would occur, Patton was already elsewhere, striking another objective. Reports later revealed that entire German divisions were left disoriented, unable to establish coherent defenses, and consistently reacting to moves that had already happened. Patton's advance had become a storm, unrelenting and unstoppable, striking fear and confusion across enemy lines. Even within Third Army, the pace was punishing. Officers and soldiers alike faced fatigue, limited fuel, and the constant pressure of moving into enemy territory with minimal support. Yet morale remained high. Patton's leadership style, bold, visible, and personal, inspired confidence. He frequently visited forward units, checking on progress and encouraging soldiers to keep moving. Improvisation became a hallmark of the campaign. Bridges were crossed with makeshift solutions. Roads blocked by debris were cleared in hours. Captured equipment became essential supplies. Patton's army functioned as a cohesive, flexible force, capable of extraordinary feats because the commander refused to accept limitations. By the end of Part 2, Patton's Third Army had achieved the unimaginable. Brittany was secured in record time, the pivot toward Paris executed flawlessly, and German forces were in a state of constant reactive chaos. The Allies had witnessed audacity redefine conventional warfare. Eisenhower, while proud, remained cautious, aware that logistical challenges and stretched supply lines could become critical at any moment. Yet the impact was undeniable. Patton had demonstrated that speed, aggression, and adaptability could achieve what doctrine and conventional planning deemed impossible. The stage was set for the next phase. Crossing the Seine, pushing toward Germany and confronting the ultimate limits of audacity. By mid-August, Patton's Third Army had stormed across Brittany and pivoted east toward Paris, leaving German forces scrambling in confusion. The momentum was unstoppable. Every day brought reports of towns liberated, roads captured, and enemy units retreating in disorder. But one challenge remained: crossing the Seine River. Traditionally, river crossings required careful planning, engineering, and preparation. They were slow, methodical, and vulnerable to enemy attacks. For Patton, however, traditional approaches were irrelevant. Speed and audacity were his tools. The Seine would not delay him. Engineers worked frantically, improvising crossings wherever shallow points or abandoned German equipment allowed. Infantry used captured boats, and tanks forged shallow paths across the river with astonishing speed. Within 36 hours, major elements of Third Army were on the far bank. German commanders could barely believe the reports. "Impossible," muttered one, staring at positions that should have been 50 miles away the previous day. Yet the reality could not be denied. Patton had moved 50 miles in a single day. The headlines in his own headquarters were almost as incredulous as those in enemy reports. Eisenhower, watching the maps, quietly muttered the words that would become legendary. "Good God! He's already there." The Seine crossing was more than a tactical victory. It was a psychological shock. German forces, already disoriented, realized they were no longer dictating the pace. They were reacting to an unpredictable, unstoppable force that appeared where it should not, striking when least expected. Patton's army was not only ahead of schedule, it was ahead of imagination. Allied commanders began to understand that speed, audacity, and improvisation could outweigh even the most carefully planned defensive lines. Patton was proving that conventional military doctrine could be bent, even broken, when a leader understood the true power of initiative. However, even Patton could not defy the realities of logistics forever. By late August, fuel shortages began to slow the advance. Tanks ground to a halt, infantry waited for supply trucks, and divisions sat tantalizingly close to the German border, yet unable to move. Patton, always impatient, was furious. "We could be in Germany now," he told his staff, "but we're stalled for lack of fuel. Every day we wait gives the enemy time to rebuild." He immediately called Eisenhower. The conversation was tense. Patton argued passionately. If Montgomery's supplies could be redirected, Third Army could cross the Rhine in 3 days. Eisenhower, constrained by priorities across the Allied front, could not comply. Fuel had to be distributed to other operations, even if that slowed the fastest. Army on the continent. Patton hung up in frustration, but he did not give up. He ordered every available resource to be scoured, every captured supply to be seized. The army could not stop. Not when victory was within reach. While Third Army waited, the soldiers endured frustration like never before. They could see German positions in the distance, almost within reach, yet immobility was imposed by circumstances beyond their control. Patton personally visited forward units, encouraging his men to maintain morale. "We will get fuel," he promised, "and when we do, we're going all the way to Berlin." Privately, however, he reflected in his diary. The delay would cost lives. "We could have ended this war by Christmas," he wrote. "The Germans were on the run. All we needed was fuel. But now they will rebuild. Thousands of lives will be lost unnecessarily." The speed, audacity, and improvisation that had defined the August campaign made the Third Army both legendary and vulnerable. Patton had achieved what few believed possible: over 600 miles in 30 days, liberating hundreds of towns, capturing over 100,000 prisoners, and causing chaos in dozens of German divisions. Yet every day beyond the Seine demonstrated the limits of human endurance, the fragility of supply lines, and the delicate balance between audacity and overreach. Patton had forced both his enemy and his allies to rethink what was achievable in modern warfare. Historians later analyzed Patton's movements with astonishment. Comparisons were made to the greatest military leaders in history. Hannibal crossed the Alps, Napoleon conquered Europe, yet Patton, in modern mechanized warfare, moved faster than anyone had imagined possible. By the time German commanders identified his positions and tried to respond, Patton was already elsewhere, striking another target. One observer noted, "In mobile warfare, speed is its own form of protection. A slow army is vulnerable, but a fast army cannot be pinned down." Another reflected, "Patton appeared where he shouldn't, attacked when we expected him to defend, and forced chaos on the enemy." Across the Allied command, Eisenhower's disbelief turned into admiration. He had seen maps showing Third Army 4 weeks ahead of schedule, towns captured in record time, and a momentum that threatened to disrupt the entire German strategy. Yet despite the audacity, the success was real. Patton had demonstrated that courage, bold leadership, and an unwavering refusal to accept limits could redefine what an army could achieve. 5 words captured the essence of his August campaign. Good God, he's already there. As September arrived, Third Army's forward momentum slowed, not because of German resistance, but because the Army had exhausted available fuel. Supply trucks struggled to keep up, and non-essential vehicles had been abandoned to maintain progress. Tanks and artillery stood idle, while infantry could only watch, waiting for the resources that would allow the final push. Soldiers were frustrated, yet they had witnessed history in motion. They had marched faster than anyone thought possible, achieved more than anyone expected, and proven the audacity of one determined leader could change the course of a campaign. Even with limitations, Patton's legacy from August 1944 was secure. He had moved 100 miles in 48 hours, crossed France in 3 weeks, and reached the German border while other armies were still struggling in Normandy. He had combined improvisation, audacity, leadership, and tactical genius into a formula that few could replicate. German generals interviewed after the war confirmed that fighting Patton was like chasing a ghost, unpredictable, relentless, and faster than any conventional army could anticipate. His approach forced the enemy to react instead of act, to defend instead of attack, and that shift alone had strategic consequences that reshaped the European theater. Today, military historians continue to study Patton's August advance, marveling at the unprecedented pace, daring maneuvers, and sheer audacity. Every decision reflected a willingness to embrace risk for strategic gain. Supply shortages, flanking dangers, and exhausted troops were all factors Patton faced without hesitation. He understood that in certain critical moments, seizing opportunity could outweigh the comfort of caution. The August campaign became a benchmark for rapid armored operations, mobile warfare, and leadership that combines intellect with bold action. As we look back on those weeks, it's impossible not to feel awe at the scale and speed of what was achieved. Patton's Third Army changed the rules of engagement, rewrote the expectations of speed and mobility, and left a mark that would endure in military history forever. The phrase Eisenhower uttered in disbelief, "Good God, he's already there," resonates not just as admiration, but as a testament to human determination, creativity, and courage in the face of the impossible. If you enjoyed this story of audacity, strategy, and one of the fastest advances in modern military history, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories from World War II. Imagine the courage, planning, and improvisation it took to achieve what Patton did. And we want to hear your thoughts. Comment below. Do you think giving Patton unlimited fuel could have ended the war even sooner? Finally, share this video with friends and fellow history lovers, because the story of Patton's August 1944 campaign is one that everyone should know. Speed, boldness, and strategic genius. That was George Patton in his prime, always ahead of schedule, always defying expectations, always unstoppable.